Welcome to Moving the Rock. Whether sales is all you do or only part of what you do, the strategies and tactics of success can often feel split between two realities. You can become someone you're not to earn the recognition and praise of people you don't respect, or you can try to figure it out on your own, knowing you'll underperform your potential. We're here to offer a third way.
The idea that you can't have success without compromise is just wrong. You don't have to compromise to win in the long term. You can play the game in such a way that you win in the short term and the long term. Through our hard lessons learned, we can shift your way of thinking and create a better way. I'm Chris, founder of SiteShift.
And I'm James, founder of Florist Group. If you're tired of the status quo, we're here to help you move the rock on your career, your business, and your life. Welcome.
Jimmy, welcome. We're back. We're doing it again.
Yeah, I love it, man. It's good to see you. A beautiful sunny day here in Columbus, and I know we've got lots to talk about.
Yes, indeed. And it's a fun conversation to have on a Friday because I'm going to use the more colloquial term. We'll get into the business term in a second. But if you're talking about something on Friday and you're talking about what a lot of people think about, you are talking about payday, baby.
That's right.
Payday. We're not talking about the candy bar. We're talking about compensation. I imagine this would be a topic that would interest a lot of listeners.
A lot of listeners and a lot of sales leaders. And, the challenge for CEOs, the challenge for heads of sales is that developing compensation plans and thinking about compensation is probably one of the few requirements for running an organization that they may have no experience in whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean, we certainly know what people generally get paid and generally how they get paid, but how do you manage all of the different moving parts of an effective comp plan, especially in the context of a high-performing sales organization or an organization you're looking to scale?
Dude. Well, so for me, we know where the rubber hits the road for so many people. But I got to tell you about something I read that I thought was really cool. It's going to kick off this conversation so we can have a conversation where we get to a place of wisdom, awareness, and sophistication, not sloppy, just throw money, which I know you've got a lot of strategic thoughts about. So here's the story. This guy he goes to Chick-fil-A at lunch and he sees this younger guy. Somehow he found out his age, I guess, through the process, but he's a little over 20 and he saw him hustling like crazy, getting it done, like balancing everything, just in a positive attitude. And I forget what industry or business this guy was in, but he saw that guy doing it and just asked him how much he made an hour. It's like $12 an hour or something. He goes, and he starts with us on Monday. He recognized someone that added a lot of value to that organization and thought, I bet he could help us a ton. And so I think for me, establishing a common ground here is we know how critical this is, but how misunderstood it is, where people just think money is going to solve everything. And I've heard you say this enough that it's sunk in a little bit, right? That for those right people, it's not just money isn't just a part of the equation, or money isn't the only part of the equation, but it is a significant part. So what do you think for you is the most common misunderstanding or approach to compensation that you think is just broken and flawed for how the sales industry works?
It's a great question. I think a lot of it has to do with my age. So when you think about the components of compensation that are the most misunderstood, the first is that salespeople are coin operated, right? Mm-hmm. And that is I refer to that as an old school attitude. Now that's supported by anecdotal evidence. It's also supported by research. So anecdotally, I've been doing this for 30 years and I'm the son of a veteran sales guy who did it for 30 years. And, back in the day when my dad was selling, I mean, he was learning to sell while I was being born, literally. He was a new hire for the Allstate Insurance Company back in '65. And about the time I was being born, he was going through training. What they the way that they ran sales organizations back then was they wanted you to join the organization, get the training, but then right away, they were encouraging you to get married, have kids, get a house, and get an expensive car. And the whole idea was we wanted you to be hungry. And so the management technique of that time, that era, was to create pressure from inside so that you had to focus on your work and you had to get stuff done. You had to make money. And generally, sales folks back then made more than average workers. So if you built a lifestyle that was expensive and you were earning more than most jobs could pay, then you weren't going to leave this job either. And because of the nature of insurance, as you make sales, you build a book of business, and that book of business will pay you year after year. And so the longer you do it, the less likely you are to move, because that book of business has equity for you. It has it's an asset. So the whole idea back then was we're going to manage you by building pressure for you and creating some fear for you. And then over time, you'll learn to love it. Don't worry about it. Today, right, a lot of the folks that grew up then with that kind of attitude, a lot of folks that grew up in the 80s, in the 90s, where growth was king and money was king and money was so important, carry with them that concept that salespeople especially are going to be coin operated. When in fact today, based on the research that we've found and the research that we leverage in our business, very few high performing salespeople are purely money motivated or primarily money motivated. Instead, they see the value of what that money can do for them in their life. So it's not about the money, it's what the money can do for them. So it's important. What's more important today is that people feel like they're being compensated for the value they bring to the organization. So that person that you talked about busting their butts for $12 an hour, it's very common to find young people who will give you more than a fair day's work for the compensation that they're being paid. And it's also common for employers to think that they can just ride that wave indefinitely. But what's more likely is that that person will begin to recognize that they're being taken advantage of. And that'll have two problematic effects. One is they're going to see you as somebody who is taking advantage of them. And then it's also going to kind of leave a bad taste in their mouth and kind of make them more coin operated, in that they will now see that their job is to trade value for dollars. So they're going to have less pure joy in their work and be much more focused on striking that fair deal, which is ultimately a good thing for them, but they will have lost a little bit of trust.
Yeah. Seeing them as coin operated. I love that phrase. It's so strong visual image. And really, this is something you've spoken of before. It dehumanizes, it objectifies the person. I want to let you comment on that, but I got to tell you this, dude, I had a nightmare last night. It's so crazy. It's related to this so deeply, because one of my kids, their job is taking advantage of them. It is just what you described. It's happening. And when she comes back and tells me about the culture, I feel like I'm coming out of my skin. Like, I'm going to call him right now. I'm going down there. And of course I wouldn't do that and take away her agency. But here's how I know it's psychologically bothering me. Last night, I wake up, cold sweat. It was a real dream. Dude, it was so intense. And I thought it had happened. She came home from school, senior in high school. She came home and she had been beaten up at school in my dream. And really bad. And I was just so angry. And I wake up and I'm like, oh, it's not real. But it still resided in my heart emotionally. And I was like, okay, why did I just dream that? It was so intense. And it just came to me as soon as I thought, it was like, oh, it's because I'm seeing her get taken advantage of. And it's making me come out of my skin. And so when we treat them this way, when people are treated this way, they're objectified. They're not treated as a human. We'll get to what it means to treat the whole person. But for people that are listening to this though, and they're going, hey man, just get them to perform, get the job done, put the coins in. Who freaking cares? What happens if they don't listen to this?
Well, if one of the things that effective leaders. Now, again, what is an effective leader? We tend to think of, you and I tend to think of this idea of a healthy leader. Healthy leaders create other healthy leaders. Unhealthy leaders create other unhealthy leaders. So let's just think about this for a second. If we think of viewing employees as coin operated, and we develop a attitude toward them that objectifies them, what do you think they're going to do to the people they manage? And what do you think they're going to do in a sales context to the people they lead, especially the customers that they lead, right? If they're being objectified and treated poorly or in an unhealthy way back at work, that's going to seep into the way they treat your customers. But if you treat people with respect, right, and you have a healthy relationship from a leadership perspective, and you cultivate core values that are aligned with the mission and vision of your business, and they're aligned with the brand that you put out there in the marketplace, then you'll cultivate individuals who act in a way that's aligned with your brand and the way that you expect your customers to be treated. And to have a salesperson who's purely coin operated and not working for you for any other reason than to make money, then they're really going to treat customers more like disposable assets. They're going to view that customer as only valuable to them if they can pay the money. And that's the relationship that your salespeople will actually be building with your customers when they have those belly-to-belly conversations, which is the most important, connection point between your organization and your marketplace.
Yeah. So you're not building this brand you want with the experience that they're going to have with clients and customers. You're not building the culture you want because of what happens. Like you said, how are they going to treat their team? And it makes me think of those leaders that we'll talk to, that are at a place of either, I know my culture could be better, or I hate this part about my culture. And I'm like, okay, well, how long have you been there? Like we've talked about before, a few years, then it's your culture, right? This is what you've shaped it to be. And so that has to be really stared down in the mirror and owned. So we got all these problems that happen. For those that would want to go on a journey of change and really get compensation dialed in, before we get some of the advanced parts, and I've got some questions around that for you. If somebody's starting on their sales leadership journey or starting on a different path, and they're wanting to get out of that coin operated model or mentality, where do you point them to begin? How do you start doing compensation in a way that is effective and builds the culture you want?
Yeah. And I think that last part of your question says it all. So what is the culture that you want? A lot of organizations are led by folks who understand the idea of culture, but don't really understand how important it can be in their organization. Therefore, it doesn't get the attention that it could get. And so culture is something that just happens versus something that we plan for and build in a proactive or programmatic way. So what you have to be thinking about when you think about compensation, the first thing is making sure that your compensation plan aligns your employee with the goals of the organization. So if the organization's goal is to have massive growth very quickly, for example, how do we create a compensation plan that focuses our employees on those critical levers that will drive that growth? In other words, are we paying them to do stuff that doesn't really add fire to that, or fuel to that fire? Are we just paying them to get stuff done that we think maybe allows us to manage them easier? I'll give you an example. When you think about a comp plan, there are plans that will compensate individuals for sales made. But you can also imagine a plan that would compensate a salesperson for meetings set or for great conversations had. If you're compensating somebody for a leading indicator like meetings, and you don't also comp or consider the quality of those meetings, then you'll be paying them to get busy work done and maybe not add much value to the pipeline that you're trying to build to feed the growth that you want to achieve. The same thing can be true if you're paying them a high base. If you're paying a high base just for showing up and getting their work done, and that means you're going to be paying them less in a variable context as a reward for them producing sales, which is what your organization wants in the first place. So the question really is, why would a sales leader or a CEO build a compensation plan that isn't aligned with the corporate objectives? Typically, that's because they are compensating for an inadequacy within the sales role itself that they have to make up for with a plan that is not connected to or not aligned with the larger goals of the organization. And so they are building a comp plan designed to fix the inadequacies that exist inside the sales organization and the sales process and the way the organization is led and managed. And it ultimately has a cascading effect and affects the entire organization.
Yeah, man. I love it. I just want to use the phrase comp structure to feel intelligent in your world. But no, this is everything. Yeah. What are you rewarding? And we can all imagine situations that we've been in where we know what was getting rewarded was antithetical to the real result that was desired. So somebody starts out on this journey, they imagine the culture they want, they start putting in motion what you've laid out. Where do you see the pitfalls that follow taking these steps that keep them from really seeing it fleshed out into these structures of compensation that are tied to the results, but build this healthy culture?
Yeah. Well, when you think of what every CEO and sales leader wants as a top performer, and when you think about what top performers expect, you have to put yourself inside their shoes. If you were a top performer and you had the option to go work anywhere, what would be the criteria you'd look for? The first thing to recognize is that top performers view, especially in sales, they view themselves and they view the decision to find a job as an investor would evaluate any kind of investment, right? They're not looking for just pay. They're looking for return on their time. So a top performer is always looking to optimize the amount of money they can make for the amount of time they dedicate to their job. And over the course of their career, if they're highly focused, they get really good at being highly effective. When I was selling, for example, there were lots of top performers around me, but I learned from them and I got to the point where I could join an organization and within 1 year be into the accelerators in my comp plan. So I could move beyond quota into multiple levels of accelerators so that I could earn max money. And I knew that if I worked hard and smart enough, I could make that happen. So every job I evaluated was based on not base compensation. I wanted to see a highly leveraged plan, meaning the variable component of the plan was much higher and much richer versus the base. We have clients, for example, that have base compensations of around $40,000 for salespeople, men and women who make $400,000 or more. Why? Well, they're top performers. They know what they can do, and they don't want to have their compensation minimized or marginalized with a plan that isn't that rich. They want to go someplace where, who cares what the base is? Let me get paid for what I'm worth. And so the only way you can build a plan like that is if when a top performer comes to see you and asks you what the plan looks like, if it's structured in a way that's going to attract that top performer, great. The next question is, who else in your organization has hit these numbers? In other words, have you already figured out how to help your salespeople get to their number? Do you already know how they should be selling to make that work? Or do they have to come into your organization and figure it out for themselves? So typically an organization that hasn't figured out sales best practice or a sales process that's going to optimize the performance of the sales team, if they don't have that in place, then they're hiring to, as you've heard me say before, fix their sales organization versus hiring to fit that process, that standard way of operating. And so a top performer is going to look at that and say, you know what? that's not for me. What's going to happen is you're going to be attracting the mediocre and poor performers. Why? Well, if you don't have a process that you know works, you're not going to be able to really get away with paying a highly leveraged comp plan, which means you're going to have a higher base structure and a smaller variable structure. And that higher base is going to now attract those mediocre and poor performers. And it's going to send those high performers away. And even if you manage to bring a high performer in, when they see how hard they have to work to make that little bit of money, they're going to compare that to what's available in the marketplace, and you won't be able to keep them.
Yeah.
So as you can see what happens, Chris. This idea of alignment.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off.
No, keep going.
But this idea of alignment is critical. You've got to think about your strategy structure, the roles that you have in the sales organization, their goals, that comp plan, those people, to get to a point of execution that you can leverage to get to the strategy that you started with. Yeah. If you don't have that alignment, you don't think about all these different pieces making sense, then you're going to build an organization with holes, with gaps, blind spots that will end up eventually holding you back and may even convince you incorrectly that your organization is already at its peak performance because you've surrounded yourself with folks who have reset that bar at a lower level. And because it's been, this has been, it's been a process that's been proving itself over and over again because you've only been able to bring on mediocre folks. You haven't been able to keep top performers. That might convince you that you're doing the best you can, when in fact, it's just a matter of creating that improved alignment, that end-to-end alignment or value chain for your organization.
Oh man, you're firing on all cylinders here. I love a good analogy, and what this is inspiring in me, because I want people to really grasp what you said, this idea of alignment from front end to back end of the process, the strategy, the structure, the roles, the goals, the people, the systems, the comp structure. It's all got to be thought through. So here's what this is taking me back to. You and I both have a shared love for a certain restaurant brand in the city we live in, because we know it's going to be great service. It's a great atmosphere. It's delicious food. Their distribution has to be so dialed in. There's no danger of getting an upset stomach from something that's spoiled, And so we dine at these for our dates and everything because that's the place. We know the experience is going to be great. And we may just change locations under the brand. Well, we happened to be out for something with one of my kids and went to a place we don't normally go to. And it's a place we've been before, but still, you walk in, right? There's a slight little fish odor from the sushi bar, not strong. And the food was good, but I'd come out of the restroom and I was just noticing that the decor felt a little drab, right? How much you have to know to really run a restaurant well. You can't just be like, I like to cook. I like to talk to people. You got to have interior design. You got to have this. It's all of this whole picture. And because if you don't have all of that whole picture, something is off. All it takes is for something to be a little bit off and you get this result you didn't want. And I love how you said it. The bar is lowered. You think this is as good as it can be. And it made me think of this restaurant where it had a slight little smell to it. You know what? The workers don't smell it anymore. They don't notice it. For them, it's in the background. It's the norm. Their brain has learned to filter it out. You and I could notice it upon first step in the door. And that's what's so powerful about getting all this aligned. The sniff test is so elevated. You are zeroed in, dialed in. You know what you're doing. So really, really powerful. I want to set up this last question, at least the last one that's on my head. So one may show up as we get into this. But I know in my own life of 8 years of hunting for my own food, I would rather have a down month that gut punches me and the potential to change my life the next month than some stable consistency that somebody's handing me. And that's what I'm hearing when you're walking through what these higher performers do. They're evaluating, right? And so many organizations are working against themselves because they're attracting people that are going to hide out in the shadows, as you say. What's the advanced learning here that you've seen? They take step one, they really think about the culture they want to build. They take step two, and they start thinking through the alignment front end to back end. How does this journey finish well? How do they run through the tape, stay sustainable and consistent with this compensation awareness? Yeah.
Well, what's the ultimate objective for a company that's scaling up or in the growth stage? The ultimate objective is to have lots of tactical short-term wins, but to keep that momentum going. So we have to be thinking about how do we create short-term revenue, but then also build a systematic approach to growth that can be sustained over time. So it's not just a matter of hiring a top performer and having them work for you for a little bit, and then if they get tired or they want to leave, replace them, right? We have to look at the system that they're a part of. It's just like any kind of professional sports team, and my head goes right to football. It's the one we probably watch the most in our house. But think about a professional football team. There are football teams here in the U.S. right now that haven't won a championship or been in the playoffs for decades, right? In the entire life of one of my kids, they haven't even sniffed the playoffs. That is now they haven't had, it's not like they haven't had access to amazing people. What's missing, right? What's missing? They're missing that system, that approach that not only attracts great players, but turns those players into a great team. The misconception in sales is that we have a bunch of individual contributors that don't need motivation, that don't need leadership. That could not be further from the truth. Great players, we refer to our salespeople as players. Great players want to be around other great players, and they want to be valued and developed. They want to become better. They're always looking for that next 10% or 1% or 3% improvement. Why not, right? I mean, you've got to do something with your time. Is it realistic to expect that somebody at the beginning of their career who was hungry to learn and always thought they could get better would stop being that way midway through their career or some point at the end of their career? It's just not the case. They want that constant stimulation, that constant leadership, that constant development, and they want to be part of something bigger than themselves, just like any other human being. So when we look at salespeople as coin operated and we dehumanize them in our minds, maybe not on purpose, but we look at them as just cogs in a mechanism that's designed to make us money, and they're easily exchangeable, then we miss a huge opportunity to provide them the leadership to create the leverage within the organization, shared best practices, camaraderie, motivation, the grit required to be resilient in good times and in bad. That is what creates sustainability. So the mistake that I see a lot of folks make is when they bring top performers in, they feel like they don't need leadership. They do need leadership. What they need is what top performers need is leadership they respect, leadership they trust. And this is not to disparage anyone who's listening right now, but if you've got a top performer who doesn't want to follow your lead, doesn't want to listen, doesn't want to come to meetings, doesn't want to complete their tasks required for every member of the team, and you can't seem to reach them, it may simply be that they don't respect you. And there isn't a close enough relationship between you and them to make that work. The key now for you as a leader is to figure out how to connect with those top performers. I oftentimes say, Chris, that it's hard for a B manager to hire and motivate an A player. And you can just look at any other sports team out there. If you look at the Brooklyn Nets, I'm just thinking of them because the Boston Celtics just knocked them out of the playoffs. Boston is the hometown of my wife and my kids. So I kind of enjoyed that series. But if you look at the Brooklyn Nets, they have some of the best players in the world on that team, and they couldn't make it into the playoffs or through the playoffs, the first round of the playoffs. Why not? They didn't respect their coach. Their coach had no impact on those players. In fact, one of the best players in the team talked about how he and the rest of his players were going to manage the team differently next year. Right? So there are some top performers who have lost the faith and lost the respect in their leadership. So what we have today in the sales world is an environment where we have a lot of top performers and future top performers looking for leadership teams that they respect, places that they can rest and invest and feel part of, so they can develop their career and become all that they believe they can be, right? They know what their potential is. They're looking for an organization and an individual who can help them realize that.
Dude.
So if you want to build sustainability into your organization and drive growth for the organization, you have to not only think about the alignment you're creating between your goals and the execution that happens in the field, you have to be thinking about what does it mean to actually lead a team of top performers, and what kind of requirements are there for the leaders that you have around you as a CEO of an organization.
Yeah, man, that awesome. Of course, that's hitting on all my bells and whistles with leadership. Thank you. I want to make sure people don't get away from the zoomed out view here of the forest, these three pieces, because these are going to be such clear, strong takeaways. Before I do that, I do have to say this. There should be a drinking game for this podcast every time we mention Tom Brady. Because he has a saying, he's like, are you collecting talent or building a team? Which is like exactly, I think, what happens in sales leadership. Because you described it. We're collecting these high performers. How do we sustain it? We start building the team. So clear takeaway here is, first, you want to think about what kind of culture you're trying to build under this umbrella of compensation. Second, you're looking at alignment, front end to back end, on the elements that Jimmy walked through. And then third, you don't stop there. There's more. You take these leaders that you've got now aligned into this system on a journey of them becoming master level in their ability to lead, and they get meaning from the mission, and they have autonomy still as sales leaders to go out and create a preferred future, which some of you are recognizing meaning, mastery, autonomy from Dan Pink's Drive, I think is a good framework there. So, dude, thanks for taking us on the ride. What else you got?
Well, I think the last thing I'd say is you reminded me of a point that was just brought up to me by a recent conversation with a client. Where do sales leaders typically come from? They're typically top performers, right? Former top performers who want to take that step into management. And so when we think about a leader and this level of leadership required to actually motivate a team of high performers, that leader has to have given up the identity. And you and I talk about identity all the time, but they have to give up the identity of that individual contributor and assume the identity of a leader. Your job no longer is, as it was when you were a top performer, to just be a solo individual, go out and close business, hit your number, do everything you're supposed to do, everything you commit to your leadership, your boss to do to earn your money. You have to be now willing to move beyond that and carry the mantle of leadership, which means you're done developing just yourself. You are now developing yourself as a leader, somebody who's responsible for developing others. And so the best leaders are able to let go of that identity connected to simply being a top performer in spite of everything else that's going around. The worst leaders are the ones that just want recognition for what they do and take recognition from their team. Yeah. One of my early managers in my career, he told me point blank, James, your only job is to make me look good. And then he would proceed to take every idea I gave to him and claim it as his own. And that was his shtick, right? And so that's obviously an extreme example. But I would just say to you that for anyone listening, leadership's important, but you've got to be willing to step into that role and give up the idea that it's just all about you. You've got to be much more interested in now thinking about and figuring out how to build that team and give to that team what they need to create the leverage to generate that 1 + 1 = 3 or 5 or 10 kind of impact on the business and on the community that you're working within.
Right on, right on. Love it. When I'm secure in who I am, I don't need that validation. I'm looking at how others can grow. It's not about me. Servant leadership, as you talk about. And what a powerful note to end on. So thanks for giving us the wisdom today. I hope the listeners are recognizing how powerful this can be when they see these 3 phases and they pay attention to where they are and they take action.
Yeah, great conversation. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for listening. If you've learned something or were inspired to try something new, please rate the podcast and share this episode with someone you know. If you'd like to learn more, visit and connect with me, James, at florissgroup.com, FLORISS group.com.
And if you want to connect with me, Chris, check out SiteShift, SIGHT shift.com. Peace.